The war between thee and the had lasted for 2,000 years. No one alive could remember how it started. The history books said it began over mining rights to the moons of the system. Those moons held rare minerals that both species needed for their ships and weapons. A small argument became a fight. The fight became a battle. The battle became a war that never stopped. There were tall beings with bodies made of living crystal. They moved slowly and thought carefully. Each was connected to all the others through something they called the consensus. When one learned something, all of them knew it within seconds. They did not make decisions alone. Every choice was made together by millions of minds thinking as one. This made them patient. They did not rush into battle. They planned for years, sometimes decades, before they attacked. But when they did attack, they were impossible to stop. They were different in every way. They were warm-blooded hunters with thick fur and sharp claws. Their eyes could see in total darkness. They lived in packs and followed strong leaders called alphas. Where they were slow and careful, they were fast and fierce. They attacked without warning, struck hard, and vanished before their enemies could respond. A warrior could kill a dozen soldiers before anyone knew he was there. For 2,000 years, these two species had done nothing but fight. At first, they fought over the moons. Then they fought over the planets near the moons. Then they fought over entire star systems. As the war grew bigger, the reasons for fighting changed. The wanted revenge for their hive cities that they had burned. The wanted revenge for their breeding colonies that they had poisoned with radiation. Every attack created a new reason for the next attack. The war fed itself. Children on both sides grew up learning to hate. Young were taught that there were savage animals who could not be reasoned with. Young were taught that there were cold machines who wanted to erase all warm-blooded life from the galaxy. Neither side could imagine peace. Peace meant betraying everyone who had died. Peace meant admitting that all the suffering had been for nothing. By the time the humans arrived, the war had destroyed hundreds of worlds. Some planets had been bombed until nothing could live on them. Others had been poisoned with chemicals or radiation that would take thousands of years to fade. The death toll was a number so large that it had lost all meaning. Billions had died, maybe trillions. No one kept count anymore. The human ship was called the ESV Magellan. It was small compared to the warships of the end. It carried no heavy weapons and only thin armor. The humans inside it were explorers, not soldiers. They had come to map new star systems and look for planets where humans might one day live. They did not know they were flying into a war zone. The first sign of trouble came when their sensors detected weapons fire. Two fleets were fighting near a small red star. The Magellan's captain, a woman named Sarah, ordered her ship to stop. They watched from a safe distance as hundreds of ships destroyed each other. The battle lasted for 3 days. When it was over, broken ships drifted through space like dead leaves. Neither side had won. Both sides had lost thousands of lives. Captain had never seen anything like it. Humans had fought wars before. Earth's history was full of blood and suffering, but humans had also learned to stop. The great wars of the 20th century had ended. Old enemies had become friends. Germany and France, Japan and America, India and Pakistan. Countries that once tried to destroy each other now traded goods and shared technology. It was not perfect. There was still conflict in the galaxy. But humans had learned that war was not forever. They detected the human ship the next day. They sent a message demanding to know who the humans were and why they were in the war zone. Captain responded honestly. She explained that the Magellan was an exploration vessel from Earth. Humans were new to this part of the galaxy. They did not want to fight anyone. The consensus studied the humans carefully. They scanned the Magellan and analyzed its technology. What they found did not impress them. Human faster-than-light engines were slow and crude. Human weapons were weak. Human bodies were soft and fragile. The consensus decided that humans were not a threat. They were barely worth noticing. They reached a similar conclusion. Their scouts had spotted the Magellan and reported back to the Dominion. The human ship was too small to matter. Its crew of 50 could not change a war that involved billions. The Alpha who reviewed the report dismissed the humans as irrelevant. Perhaps they could be captured later and used as slaves, or perhaps they would simply die in the crossfire. Either way, they did not matter. But the humans did not leave. Captain spent weeks gathering information about the war. She talked to traders from neutral species who moved between the battle lines. She studied old records and news reports. She learned everything she could about their history, their culture, and their hatred for each other. What she learned broke her heart. 2,000 years of war, entire generations born into conflict, children who never knew peace, planets that would be poisoned for. And for what? For moons that had been mined empty centuries ago, for revenge that could never be satisfied, for pride that had cost more than any victory could ever be worth. Captain called a meeting with her senior officers. They gathered in the Magellan's small conference room, a space barely big enough for 10 people. She told them what she had learned and what she wanted to do. Most of her officers thought she was crazy. Lieutenant Commander said it plainly. 2,000 years of hate could not be fixed by one small ship. The end would laugh at them, or kill them. Agreed that it might not work. She agreed that they might die trying. But she could not fly away and pretend she had not seen what she saw. Humans had almost destroyed themselves many times throughout history. They had stood at the edge of extinction and pulled back. If there was even a small chance that they could help, she had to try. She sent a message to both sides. It was simple and direct. The humans of the ESV Magellan requested a meeting with representatives of the Consensus and the Dominion. The purpose of the meeting would be to discuss the possibility of peace. The humans offered to serve as neutral mediators. They had no interest in the outcome except to end the suffering. They received the message and processed it through the Consensus in less than a second. The idea was absurd. Humans knew nothing about the war or its history. They were children playing with matters beyond their understanding. The Consensus decided to ignore the message. The Alpha who read the message laughed so hard that his subordinates worried he might choke. Peace. With the crystal-skinned monsters who had murdered his ancestors, mediated by weak little aliens who could barely travel between stars. He threw the message away and ordered his fleet to prepare for the next attack. Captain waited for a response. Days passed, then weeks. No answer came from either side. Her officers said she should give up. The end did not want peace. They wanted blood. The Magellan should leave before it got caught in the next battle. Refused to give up. She sent the message again. Then again. Then again. Each time she added new information. She told them about Earth's history of war and peace. She shared records of human conflicts that had ended. She offered proof that enemies could become friends if they chose to try. Finally, after 3 months, she received a response. It came from a neutral space station on the edge of the war zone. Both the and the had agreed to send representatives, not because they wanted peace, not because they believed the humans could help. They agreed because they were curious. They wanted to see what these strange little aliens would say. Captain took a deep breath when she read the message. It was not much. It was barely anything at all, but it was a start. The neutral station floated in the empty space between stars. It was old and worn, built centuries ago by a species that had since gone extinct. Now it served as a meeting place for traders, smugglers, and spies who moved between the war zones. Its walls were with weapons damaged from a dozen different attacks. Its life support systems wheezed and groaned. But it was neutral ground, and that made it valuable. Ambassador Wei arrived first. She had been promoted from captain after her repeated attempts to contact both sides had finally succeeded. Earth's government had decided that if she was going to risk her life for peace, she should have a proper title. She was not sure it mattered. The End did not care about human ranks or positions. They barely cared about humans at all. She brought a small team with her. Lieutenant Commander served as her security chief, though his 3 guards seemed pitiful compared to the armed forces both alien species would bring. Doctor was her expert on alien psychology, a woman who had spent her life studying how different species thought and communicated. James handled translation and communications, making sure everyone understood each other perfectly. The delegation arrived second. Their ship was elegant and beautiful, made of flowing crystal that seemed to grow rather than be built. 5 emerged, walking in perfect unison. Their crystalline bodies caught the station's lights and scattered them into rainbows. The leader was taller than the others, nearly 3 meters high. His body was a deep blue color that shifted toward purple at the edges. Through the consensus, he carried the thoughts and opinions of billions. They arrived last. Their ship was brutal and efficient, covered in weapons and heavy armor. It looked like a clenched fist flying through space. 8 warriors emerged first, their eyes scanning for threats, their claws extended. Then came the Alpha, a massive male with dark gray fur marked by scars from 100 battles. His name was. He had been fighting since he was old enough to hold a weapon. The 3 groups gathered in the station's largest meeting room. It was still cramped with all of them inside. The stood on one side, still and patient. The stood on the other, restless and alert. The humans stood in the middle, smaller than both, trying not to look as nervous as they felt. Wei spoke first. She thanked both sides for coming. She knew this was difficult. She knew they had no reason to trust humans or each other. But she believed that talking was better than fighting, even if the talking led nowhere. At the very least, no one would die today. The leader responded in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. He said the consensus had agreed to this meeting out of curiosity, nothing more. Humans were a new species in this region of space. They wanted to understand them before deciding how to deal with them. He made no promises about peace. Alpha spoke next. His voice was a deep growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor. He said the Dominion had come to see what the humans wanted. Perhaps they were spies for the. Perhaps they were fools who did not understand what they were getting into. Either way, he would learn the truth today. Wei took a slow breath. She had prepared for this moment for months. She had studied everything she could find about both species. She had practiced her speech hundreds of times. But now, standing between 2 enemies who had been killing each other for 2,000 years, all her preparation felt useless. She asked them a simple question: why were they fighting? The silence that followed was heavy and strange. The crystals dimmed slightly as the consensus processed the question. They exchanged glances, their fur bristling with confusion. It seemed like such an obvious question. Everyone knew why they were fighting. They had always been fighting. The leader answered first. They were fighting because they had attacked their colonies and murdered their people. They were fighting because they could not be trusted to keep any agreement. They were fighting to protect their species from extinction. Alpha laughed bitterly. They were fighting because they had stolen their territory and poisoned their worlds. They were fighting because the crystal monsters wanted to wipe out all warm-blooded life. They were fighting to survive. Wei nodded slowly. She understood. Both sides believed they were fighting in self-defense. Both sides believed the other had started it. Both sides had enough grievances to fuel another 2,000 years of war. But she had one more question. What would victory look like? Again the silence stretched. They consulted their consensus. They muttered among themselves. Finally, both sides gave the same answer. Victory would mean destroying the enemy completely. Nothing else would make them safe. Nothing else would honor their dead. Wei pulled up a holographic display. It showed images from Earth's history. She showed them the trenches of the First World War, where millions died fighting over a few miles of mud. She showed them the ruins of Hiroshima after the atomic bomb, where one weapon killed 80,000 people in seconds. She showed them Rwanda and Bosnia and Syria and all the other places where humans had slaughtered each other. Then she showed them what came after. She showed German and French soldiers shaking hands 60 years after they tried to kill each other. She showed Japanese and American students studying together in universities built on the ashes of war. She showed former enemies trading goods, sharing technology, and slowly learning to trust each other. Humans were not wiser than thee or braver than thee, she said. Humans were not special. They had made every mistake possible. They had nearly destroyed themselves many times, but they had also learned something important. War could end. Enemies could become friends. It was hard. It took generations. It required people to choose forgiveness over revenge, but it was possible. The leader's crystals flickered rapidly. The consensus was processing her words, comparing them to their own experience, looking for flaws in her logic. Finally, he spoke. Humans had only fought other humans. They could not understand true alien hatred. The gap between and was too wide. They did not think the same way. They did not want the same things. Peace between them was impossible. Alpha agreed, which was perhaps the first time he had agreed with about anything. His ancestors had fought and died for 2,000 years. He could not betray them by shaking hands with their killers. The very idea made him sick. Wei did not argue. She simply made her offer. Earth would serve as a neutral mediator. Humans had no stake in the war. They did not care who controlled which moon or star system. They only wanted the killing to stop. If both sides ever grew tired of fighting, the humans would be there to help them find another way. They rejected the offer immediately. The consensus decided in 0.003 seconds that the proposal was naive and worthless. Alpha rejected it with a snort of contempt. He told Wei that she was a fool. Then he turned and led his warriors back to their ship. The meeting was over. It had lasted less than an hour. Nothing had been accomplished. Wei stood alone in the meeting room, surrounded by empty chairs, wondering if she had made any difference at all. Doctor put a hand on her shoulder. She said what Wei already knew. They had planted a seed. It might take years to grow. It might never grow at all. But they had done something that no one else had done in 2,000 years. They had made both sides think, even for a moment, about the possibility of peace. Wei nodded slowly. She did not feel hopeful. She felt tired and small and foolish. But she also knew she would try again. She would keep trying until someone listened or until she died trying. The Magellan left the neutral station and returned to Earth. Wei filed her report and recommended that humanity keep watching the war. She believed that someday, something would change. Someday, the end would grow tired of killing each other. When that day came, humans should be ready to help. Her superiors read her report and filed it away. They had other concerns. Humanity was still expanding into the galaxy, still building colonies, still dealing with 100 small problems that seemed more urgent than a distant alien war. Wei's mission was noted as a failure. She was given a desk job and told to stop wasting resources on hopeless causes. But she did not stop watching. Every day she checked the news from the war zone. Every month she read reports about battles and death tolls and planets rendered lifeless. And every year, on the anniversary of her failed meeting, she sent a new message to both thee and the. The offer still stands, she wrote. Whenever you are ready, we will be here. For 3 years, no one answered. The war continued as it always had. The plan their slow, grinding campaigns, the launch their swift and brutal raids. Planets burned, ships exploded, people died by the thousands, then the millions. But something had changed, even if no one wanted to admit it. Both sides had heard the human ambassador's words. Both sides had seen the images from Earth's history. The consensus found itself returning to those images again and again, studying them, analyzing them, trying to understand how enemies could become friends. The warriors told stories about the strange little human who had asked them why they were fighting. They laughed about her foolishness, but they also remembered her question. Why were they fighting? The answer had seemed so obvious before. Now it felt less certain. The moons of the system had been mined empty centuries ago. The original cause of the war was gone. All that remained was revenge, an endless cycle of attack and counterattack that had no purpose except to continue itself. The breaking point came in the 3rd year after the human meeting. They launched a massive assault on the. They deployed a new biological weapon, a virus designed to shatter crystal structures. It worked better than they expected. One of the largest hive cities on the planet crumbled to dust in hours. 18 million died. The response was swift and terrible. They targeted the breeding colonies on Prime with focused radiation weapons. The radiation did not kill quickly. It damaged cells and scrambled genetic codes. The who survived the initial attack died slowly over weeks and months. Worse, their eggs and embryos were destroyed. An entire generation of was wiped out before they were born. Both sides had committed atrocities before. Both sides had killed millions, but something about these attacks felt different. Perhaps it was the scale. Perhaps it was the method. Perhaps both species had simply reached the limit of what they could endure. The consensus began to fracture. For the first time in centuries, individuals started questioning the collective decision-making. Some argued that the war must continue until they were extinct. Others argued that extinction was impossible and the war was destroying them faster than any enemy could. The arguments grew heated. The consensus struggled to maintain unity. The Dominion faced its own crisis. Alpha, the same warrior who had dismissed the human ambassador 3 years ago, watched his pack die from radiation sickness. He held his eldest son as the young warrior coughed up blood and begged for death. He performed the mercy killing himself, as tradition demanded. Then he sat alone in the dark and wept for the first time since he was a cub. When the weeping stopped, felt something he had never felt before. He was tired. Not physically tired, though he was that too. He was tired in his soul. He was tired of burying warriors who died for a cause no one could remember. He was tired of teaching cubs to hate an enemy they had never met. He was tired of fighting a war that could never be won. He thought about the human ambassador and her strange question. Why were they fighting? He had laughed at her then. The answer was obvious. But now, sitting in the ashes of his son's funeral pyre, the answer did not seem obvious at all. The human message arrived the next day. It was the same message that Ambassador Wei sent every year. The offer still stands. Whenever you are ready, we will be here. Stared at the message for a long time. He remembered the human standing in the neutral station, smaller than everyone else, facing two enemies who had every reason to kill her. She had not been afraid. She had believed in something bigger than fear. He did not believe in peace. He did not trust them, but he was tired of war. He was tired of death. He was tired of everything. He sent a response to the humans. Just 2 words, we come. Across the war zone, the consensus received the same yearly message. The debates continued as they always did. Most of the collective wanted to ignore it, but a growing minority argued for something different. The war was destroying them. Their population was declining. Their economy was collapsing. Their greatest cities were rubble. If they kept fighting, they would not exist in another 1,000 years. The majority did not want to admit defeat. The minority pointed out that peace was not defeat. Peace was survival. They had always prided themselves on rational thought. Was it rational to keep fighting a war they could not win? The debate lasted for days. In the end, the consensus reached a decision by the narrowest margin in its history. They would attend another meeting with the humans, not to make peace, not to surrender, just to talk, just to see if there was any alternative to extinction. Ambassador Wei received both responses on the same day. She sat at her desk, the same desk where she had been exiled for 3 years, and read them over and over. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were wet. She had not expected this. She had hoped for it, dreamed of it, prayed for it in her own non-religious way, but she had not expected it to actually happen. She stood up and walked to her supervisor's office. She told him that she needed a ship. The N had agreed to talk. Her supervisor laughed at her. He said she was wasting her time. 2,000 years of hate could not be fixed by one small human. Wei smiled sadly. She said he might be right. Probably he was right, but she had to try anyway. The Magellan launched 3 days later with Ambassador Way aboard. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray. The stress of the past 3 years had carved lines into her face, but her eyes were the same, bright and determined and full of stubborn hope. The negotiations took 11 years. There were moments when everything almost fell apart. Alpha walked out of the meetings twice, once when a delegate mentioned the biological attack, and once when someone suggested that they should pay reparations for damaged worlds. The consensus nearly collapsed 4 times as different factions argued about terms and conditions. 3 assassination attempts were made, 2 against representatives and 1 against Wei herself. The humans mediated with endless patience. When talks broke down, they proposed new frameworks. When tempers flared, they called for breaks and cooling-off periods. When both sides accused each other of bad faith, the humans pointed out that bad faith was better than no faith at all. They refused to take sides. They refused to give up. They refused to accept that peace was impossible. Slowly, painfully, trust began to build. Not much trust. Not deep trust. Just enough to keep talking. Just enough to sign small agreements about prisoner exchanges and humanitarian corridors. Just enough to imagine that bigger agreements might someday be possible. The Treaty of was signed on a new station, one built jointly by all 3 species. It was not a perfect peace. Both sides had to make compromises that felt like betrayals. They gave up claims to territory they had held for centuries. They agreed to limits on their military that their warriors found humiliating. Everyone left the signing ceremony feeling like they had lost. But the killing stopped. For the first time in 2,000 years, no died at hands. No fell to weapons. Children on both sides grew up without learning to hate. They grew up curious about their former enemies instead of afraid. Ambassador Wei died 14 years after the treaty was signed. She was an old woman by then, bent and frail. But she lived long enough to see and students studying together at a new university built on one of the moons of. She lived long enough to see former warriors from both sides working together to rebuild the worlds they had destroyed. At her funeral, representatives from all 3 species spoke. Alpha, now old himself, his fur turned white with age, said something that surprised everyone. He said that Wei had taught him what strength really meant. Strength was not killing your enemies. Strength was having the courage to stop fighting when fighting was all you had ever known. The representative, speaking for a consensus that was no longer fractured, said something equally surprising. Wei had shown them the limits of pure logic. Sometimes the logical choice was to keep fighting forever. Sometimes it took something illogical, something emotional, something deeply human to break the cycle. The war had ended, not because humans were stronger or smarter or better than it ended because one small woman on one small ship had refused to believe that it had to continue. She had looked at 2,000 years of slaughter and decided that something else was possible. It was, in the end, a very human thing to do. In the centuries that followed, they slowly learned to live together. They would never love each other. The scars of war ran too deep for that. But they stopped killing each other, and that was enough. They traded goods and shared technology and built new things together. Their children and great grew up in a galaxy where peace was normal and war was history. And in the libraries of both species, the story of the humans who ended the war was told and retold. It became a legend, then a myth, then something almost sacred. The humans who came from nowhere, the humans who asked why, the humans who refused to accept what everyone else believed. It was, both species agreed, a story worth remembering.